Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. We have a crazy story to discuss coming out of British Columbia today that many of you have already messaged me about or tagged me in on social media. I was already going to talk about it, but it's just demonstrative of the fact that everyone really cares about what's going on here. So, BC Conservative leader John Rustad and the BC Conservative candidate for the riding of Surrey Guildford in the last provincial election, Honveer Randawa, just did a press conference on election irregularities in the BC provincial election that, of course, took place back in October of 2024. I think that this was big news and it definitely isn't nothing. And so I want to discuss it with you today. But first, I will go over to what John had said in this press conference, and then we will discuss what could happen based on all the information they are both going to come out with, as well as the information they are soliciting from the public.
So since the election, we have had a group of people that have been looking into a number of things, a number of issues that have come up and that have been raised. And we felt it important at this point to share what we have found to date, but also to indicate that there is more work that still needs to be done with regards to this. Heard many stories about, for example, non-Canadian citizens who have voted in this election. However, that's something that we can't prove because obviously no one's going to be coming forward and putting up their hand saying, please have me eligible for a fine and put me in jail. So these are the types of things that are hard on in terms of it, which is one of the reasons why we'll have a recommendation associated with that as well. We found other cases where an individual went to vote and was told they couldn't vote because somebody had already voted. Somebody had already registered a vote in their name. Errors can be made. You understand those sort of things. Found another incident, for example, where an individual was registered as voting who said they didn't vote. Okay. Once again, you don't know for sure how those things play out.
And I just want to cut this off here for just a second because we have to contextualize why individual anecdotes actually do matter here. Honveer Randawa, standing to John Rustad's left, or I guess standing to his right, lost the riding of Surrey Guildford to the incumbent Gary Begg by 22 votes. That is as thin of a margin as you can possibly get in politics. Every once in a while, you do to get a case where somebody loses or wins by a single vote, but this is extremely thin. And Honveer is going to get into it in just a bit, that in their riding, they already have more than enough irregularities that should trigger a by-election, and they still haven't really even scratched below the surface of asking people about other issues. And small issues do matter when whoever wins that riding decides if it's an NDP majority government or minority government. Yes, if there's 50 irregularities in a race where 1,000 votes ended up putting someone over the top, we can kind of ignore it. Mistakes can be made. But as John Rust is going to get into, it's actually a lot of the problems and the lax rules are the problem of changes that David Eby made back in 2019.
Because things that we hear. But I think probably some of the more disturbing things that we have found is in particular in the riding of Surrey Guildford. And Honveer was our candidate here in Surrey Guildford, and he's here to share a few words as well with regards to the work that he's been doing in terms of follow-up on the election. And in that particular riding, we found a case of a double vote, somebody who voted twice. We have found a case where there have been at least almost 24 ballots that were cast from people who are not registered or not currently, sorry, let me rephrase that, whose place of residence that was on Elections BC is not where they currently live. And so
and that could be a massive deal because even that if that person wanted to vote in good faith and they showed up to the normal place they usually went to vote, but they had moved 7 blocks away and they actually were in a different riding, that also shapes the election outcome. And so this is all very, when I not factual stuff, because we should obviously have to go in and verify the facts of this case, but that's very real stuff. That's not like an abstract theoretical way that maybe a vote wasn't cast that should have been cast, like, oh, this voting station had to shut down and that would have added 50 votes to our total. But like, no, this is like literally somebody voted twice, somebody voted who wasn't in the riding, stuff like that, that is provable. That vote should not count, sort of stuff.
Follow-up that's needed to find out, just to make sure to know just where they did it. Did they live in the riding, or did they live outside of the riding and use a different address to be able to vote in the riding? One of the more serious issues we have found was associated with a care facility, a seniors home, where 21 mail-in ballots were cast. Mail-in ballots where the voting station was just 80 meters across the road from where this facility was located. And individuals in that facility have come forward with affidavits with regards to voting, regards to what happened associated with that. There's concern that these votes, that a third party has come in and been partaken and part of how these votes were cast and done. It is a serious concern that needs to be looked into with regards to an investigation.
So already this is a fairly shocking blockbuster press conference they have, and it got more detailed when Honveer Randawa ended up speaking. And I know Honveer, so you could say I'm a little biased here, but I know him. That guy worked his butt off in Surrey Guildford. That guy walked around with a Roman legion of volunteers everywhere he went, door knocking, handing out literature, putting up signs. He's not some chump who thinks that I got messed over when he didn't work hard. That guy worked super hard. So I think that guy deserves to have an inquiry. So to be clear, what the Conservatives are going to do is that the Conservative Party is demanding a legislative inquiry into the election procedures to find other issues around voting, and they're calling for basically a suspension of penalties for anyone who may have voted wrongly, because you don't want people to be silent just because if they say something, they're going to get targeted, when it might have been a non-citizen who voted, who was told they can vote. They ended up casting a ballot and their registration was not it was not shown that they were not a citizen, so they were able to cast a ballot, and then that person gets fined for saying anything. So you don't want that person to be fined so they can actually speak up. So that's something that John's calling for. They also want voting procedures looked at and then tightened because things were just done wrongly in the election. It's not because there's mass fraud. That's something we should get right. I don't want the comments to fill up with people being like, oh yeah, it should have been an 80-seat majority for the Conservatives. That's not what's being said here. If there's any fraud in election, it's always going to be small scale. Somebody potentially, in this case, going into a care home who either doesn't work there or works there and basically filling out ballots on people's behalf because they have access to all their identification and can just get the person to sign off on it, who probably didn't really know what's going on. That's a problem. And it's always going to be small scale like this. So this isn't saying like a riding that the Conservatives lost by 1,000 votes is going to be overturned, or even 300. But when there's multiple ridings where the NDP or Conservative candidate only won by less than 100 votes, any irregularities start to kind of really matter here, because it shapes how the government is going to act. This isn't even like we're cutting around the edges and maybe 2 seats should have been flipped, but it would have still been an NDP majority by a long shot. The NDP has a literal single seat majority. They have the exact 47 seats they need for a majority. Them going from 47 to 46 makes a really big deal here. So anyways, here is Honveer speaking to the media.
As you know, I'm Honveer Randawa, so I ran for the election from Surrey Guildford, electoral riding as a candidate for Conservative Party of BC. So at the end of the election on October 19, there was a 103 vote lead, and with just a handful of votes after that, the lead was gone and I was trailing by 22 votes. So of course that raised reasonable concern. We asked for the voting list, the participation list from BC elections, and BC elections provided the list, but in quite a cumbersome manner. We asked for the list in categorized manner so we could see who has voted through mail-in ballots and who has voted through other alternative methods. But that was not provided to us. So
that is also a good point to keep in mind. They've found, I believe he's going to go on to say 46 irregularities in a riding that he only lost by 22 votes, and which is already double the amount that make up the difference. And of course, some of them could be Conservative votes that would be taken out. Some could be NDP votes. You don't know. Maybe they're all Green voters and it really doesn't matter. But the thing is, he's also saying that it's hard to even track this stuff down, because if you don't have all the information of who voted when to be able to fact check stuff, you're having to rely on leads that come from the public. And I believe that the leads that came from this care home and other facilities came from people who lived there who were reaching out, or their family members. And later, John Rustad, when answering media questions, even said some of this information came from people associated with the NDP campaign, bringing it to their attention.
With the support that we had at hand, and with John Rustad's amazing support as well, we were able to conduct a review of who had voted in Surrey Guildford riding and what contraventions possibly happened. So this particular lodge did stick out because there were 21 mail-in ballots which were casted from this lodge, and this lodge is literally across the street from the voting place.
This is the care home he's referring to as a lodge,
which is one of the schools. So that did raise further concerns. And under the section 109.01 of the Election Act, one individual can only assist another individual with the mail-in ballot package. So that raised a concern to us, but that also raises a bigger concern that this information was available to BC Elections. So why did not it raise a concern to them? But for us to conduct this review that we did, and we found 45 irregularities, contraventions, and the gap between the leading NDP candidate and myself is 22. So 45 irregularities we have found, possible irregularities at this point. So the gap is 22. And we are going to be bringing a petition in court shortly as well, as to make the election in Surrey Guildford invalid.
And that's specifically Honveer and his campaign bringing that challenge forward. The Conservative Party of BC is not part of that challenge. That's not because they don't believe in it. I think it's the whole point is that he's already a lawyer. He can already do the legal work himself. So he's going to take it forward that way. And the Conservative Party is going to go through the legislative inquiry side of things, because the Conservative Party doesn't really need to be involved in this at all. It would just make the case more cumbersome. Plus, this is the proper way of doing it, in the sense that you need to have proper standing to bring forward a complaint. The BC Conservatives, in theory, could technically be denied looking into this because they don't have standing, because they're not the actual candidate who was potentially suffered a loss through bad election procedures and irregularities. So Honveer is the correct person to be bringing this one forward.
Because the point at hand is that the justice must prevail and the democracy must be protected. The voices of these voters, whoever is voting for a reason. They want the right government, or they want their vote should be counted in the rightful manner. So this entire endeavor has not been easy, but we have finally, as Mr. Rustad has explained as well, there are 45 possible contraventions of the Election Act, and especially this lodge, as it did stick out. So we are asking BC Elections, and the complaint that you have a copy, the redacted, that we are asking BC Elections to do their thorough investigation into this. And also, if it does point to irregularities, then other institutions similarly to the same should also be looked into. So that is where we sit with this. And Mr. Rustad, if you have anything else to add, please.
So just to be clear, a complaint has been filed with Elections BC, and what we found in that facility, we have heard from people that have come forward and talked about similar issues with other facilities, and that to me is what is very concerning, because there may be a pattern. It's something that still needs to be investigated. We still need to be able to track down the work that's in there. We're going to continue doing the work that we can do to look at and to continue to follow up on this. But it's important now, I think, that Elections BC gets involved with its process, as well as the independent review, to be able to make sure that what is being done here is all revealed and all up and up, and that we can make sure with confidence going forward that the election process in British Columbia can be relied on and defended.
This is where I actually will give a small critique to the BC Conservatives. This is why, after the BC provincial election on October 19th and all the recounts that had to happen and whatnot, never say the election was perfect, full integrity, all that stuff. I never said that, but I also have always resisted people saying, like, the BC NDP only won because of election fraud. Even then, we don't know that. We don't know one way or the other. Even then, if Surrey Guildford somehow is flipped through an investigation or a by-election takes place and the Conservatives win that one, or maybe the NDP still wins it, that still wouldn't really mean anything in terms of, well, that wouldn't actually flip who won the election. That would just flip a single riding and the BC NDP would just have a minority government. But I've always taken the position that I would just say that I don't have any evidence yet. And if evidence comes forward, that's good. This is evidence coming forward. So there we go. We can now evaluate these facts. But as the Conservative Party, don't come out and say, it's actually a great election. I observed it. It was amazing. Because you end up, the media is now going to say, well, you guys said, and they have said this. I watched the full interview or the press conference with the questions. You already have a lot of media members from more lefty media sources saying, well, you said on the days after election day that it was a perfect election and everything was brilliant. So what's changed? And it's like, ugh, okay, yeah, I guess he said that. This is why you don't say this, but it's like, that doesn't mean anything. They were supporting the system before that. And even David Eby, the premier of British Columbia, the NDP premier, had to come out and say, yeah, ballots were not being handled properly. We need this looked into. BC election officials shouldn't be taking ballot boxes home, which was happening in the early vote. Ballot boxes would be taken home, like taped over and with all the security measures, but you still shouldn't take it to somebody's house. What happens if the person storing it and the person who has the ability to retape it and everything know each other and they're willing to commit fraud? That doesn't mean it's happening, but this is why you have tight procedures so that we cannot theorize ways of messing it over. You lock up all the boxes in the same place where only like two different people need to have the same key in order to open it up or whatever. That's the problem. Anyways, now I think that this is one of those moments where I got to talk about the immediate reaction that many in the media have had to this, and then I want to talk a little bit about it. Good thing is the BC Conservatives aren't just pushing out this press conference and then saying nothing afterwards. They have put out this statement alongside the press conference they held. They said, Leader of the opposition, John Rustad, is calling for immediate independent review of the provincial election. This follows new evidence of irregularities in the pivotal riding of Surrey Guildford, which the NDP won by just 22 votes. And yeah, I think this is absolutely the time where you need an inquiry. But look at this post from this guy, Maxwell A. Cameron, a political science professor at UBC, and he says, Rustad's allegations are pretty thin. Lots of vague claims without any evidence, followed by recommendations that stoke misinformation and distrust, all in the name of confidence in the election. I believe he even deleted his former post and posted this one because it's linked to the same or to a CBC article. I saw another post from him, and maybe I'll go and see if I can find it, where he basically said this is election denialism. For John Rustad to even care about care about integrity here. Look at this. Here, actually, I found it. He says, Rustad's allegations don't pass the smell test. Oh, yeah. Maxwell A. Cameron's on the case, guys. Super sleuth Max A. Cameron's already smelled out that this isn't credible. And he says, this looks more like election denialism than defense of democracy. This man's an academic. You're just going to smell out that this looks like election denialism. It's not that goes along with the narrative from the 2020 U.S. presidential election that Trump's people were denying the election, and now you're trying to link the two. Oh no, you just know. Oh, the evidence is pretty thin. It's almost like they had to send out redacted information to the media because you can't just start naming people out of nowhere. And so they're going to take this in front of a judge, Honveer is, and the Conservatives are asking for an inquiry. They're not saying, we have all the answers, here's proof, and then dumping out vague allegations. They have evidence that are then going to be further investigated with help from the public. And I would ask all of you, if you know anything about problems in the election, go forward, go approach Honveer's team, go approach the BC Conservatives for an inquiry. Make sure you actually have something to what you're claiming. Don't say that, well, this seems odd. Make sure you have actual, evidence to support a claim. Because again, it always annoys me when people are like, well, I and all my friends voted Conservative, so I can't see why the NDP would win the riding I was in. It's like, okay, that doesn't mean anything. But if you have like people who didn't vote, who like say that, or like somebody who went in to vote when someone said a ballot's already been cast for you, go call out that. call out any other way where votes were being collected en masse by a single person because that's illegal, all that sort of thing. But this, again, annoys the heck out of me. When you have somebody come out and they say, like, well, this seems like denialism. How do you know? Aren't you supposed to actually care about evidence? But you're just here to say, oh, you're a denier. And that's what the media was doing during the questioning period. Some people were asking good questions. Other people were doing the whole, well, isn't this kind of like denialism? Isn't this going to make people question the voting process? Guys, wanting integrity is not a problem. This is a pretty close riding. I'd hope that we'd all care about it. In fact, there was a riding in the last provincial election that had to be overturned through through a judicial vote counting, through a judicial recount, because some of the votes were not counted properly, or the votes were not real, like there was not a real ballot and they had to be destroyed. That happens. And so I think we should all wait and see what happens here. And we should try and make sure that members of the public who know something are able to come forward and say something, because again, it actually does matter for the governance of British Columbia. And I'll just add the cherry on top that it would be nice if the NDP had less power in this government, because they are already screwing things up big time. Their tax revenues in this last fiscal year did not come in the way they thought they were, and so they're about to run a massive deficit in 2025. By the way, there's only going to be 67 sitting days in the legislature this year, which allows for the BC NDP to stifle their opposition, because there's only so many days a year out of the days that the legislature sits that the opposition gets to forward their own legislative proposals, their own bills, their own petitions, and all this stuff. And when there's only 67 days, they're maybe going to get like 18 days, maybe 20 days to actually do their own business. You want as many sitting days as possible. By the way, 67 days means these people are working like part-time. They're not even working part-time. And while, yes, MLAs work the rest of the year in their own constituency, meeting with their constituents and doing other work, research and all that, the problem is that now they're stifled in how they present that officially in the legislature, where most business can actually be done like fully, rather than just sort of doing background work. When you present stuff in the legislature, there is a little bit more oomph to it than just having to film videos in your office. Being able to present stuff on the record is kind of the point of being an MLA often. Anyways, so that's it for me today, guys. If you like the show and you're not yet a subscriber, make sure to subscribe, like this video, leave a comment, as well as if you want to support us financially, you can always donate to the legal fund linked in the description below. It's the Give, Send, Go thing, being sued by a Chinese billionaire developer over defamation that over 3 years he has not provided any evidence for, but he's just trying to draw out this court battle, and it's cost me more than $34,000 at this point. So anything you can donate does help. Again, linked in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. I'll see you guys all later.